Today, we are going to try something. We're going to try to live for 1 week on the projected 2026 minimum wage. Now, we're using real numbers here to see if a full-time job can even cover the bare essentials. I'm talking no luxuries, no emergencies, just the absolute basics.
So, that brings us to the big question, right? Could you actually survive? We're about to find out. We're going to use real-world data to build our budget for the next 7 days and see if it's even possible.
All right, to really dig into this, we're going to follow 2 different people working full-time. First up, we've got worker A in Jackson, Mississippi. They're earning the federal minimum wage. Then we have worker B all the way in Seattle, Washington, where the state minimum wage is a lot higher. This huge difference creates what one source actually calls a jurisdictional wage lottery.
Okay, first things first, the paycheck. Before we can spend a single dime, we have to figure out how much money these workers actually take home after a 40-hour work week. And right out of the gate, you can see this massive gap. By 2026, believe it or not, the federal minimum wage is still projected to be stuck at just $7.25 an hour. That's what our worker in Mississippi is making. But then you look at Seattle, and their state minimum is more than double that. It's $17.13. So, after a 40-hour week, our Jackson worker grosses $290, while our Seattle worker brings in over $685. Once we take out estimated taxes, here's what we're left with: about $246 in Mississippi and $582 in Washington. This is the cash we have to work with for the entire week.
And now, for the monster expense, the biggest bill of them all, housing. This is usually the first thing that gets paid, and it takes the largest bite out of pretty much everyone's paycheck.
Just to give you an idea, in a city like Seattle, the housing market is absolutely brutal. By 2026, the median rent for just a 1-bedroom apartment is projected to be over $2,000 a month. Think about that. That number alone is a huge mountain to climb for someone earning minimum wage.
So let's break that down into a weekly cost, since that's our budget. Well, the numbers are pretty stark. In Jackson, rent for a 1-bedroom comes out to about $216 a week. But in Seattle, it's a staggering $482. Both of those figures are incredibly high compared to the paychecks we just saw.
And just like that, one single bill has practically wiped them out. After paying for a roof over their head, our worker in Seattle has just over $100 left. In Jackson, it's way worse. They're left with only $30 to cover food, transportation, and everything else for the entire week. All right, next up, food. With the little bit of money that's left, they now have to buy enough groceries to last 7 days. And we're talking meals cooked at home, absolutely no takeout, no restaurants.
So how do we figure out this cost? Well, we're not just guessing. We're using the USDA's official Thrifty Food Plan. This is basically the government's benchmark for the absolute bare minimum cost of a healthy diet, assuming every single meal is made from scratch at home.
You know, this reality is so grim that researchers actually have a name for it. They don't just call it budgeting. No, they call it nutritional austerity. It's this constant state of carefully managing every single calorie with absolutely zero room for error.
So after buying just the cheapest possible groceries, our worker in Jackson is now more than $50 in debt. They're in the red. And in Seattle, they're left with just $1.38. The budget has already completely failed in one city and is barely hanging on by a thread in the other.
But of course, the dills don't stop there, right? You still have to get to your job. You still have to pay for basic health care. These aren't luxuries. These are things you need to be able to keep working.
And these costs are not small either. The average weekly cost for just transportation and some basic health care adds another huge bill to the pile. We're talking over $250 in Jackson and over $220 in Seattle.
So here it is, the final tally. After 1 full week of work, after paying for just housing, food, and getting to that job, our Jackson worker is over $300 in debt. And even in Seattle, with a much higher wage, the worker is still almost $220 in the red. The math, it just doesn't work.
So what is going on here? How can someone work a full-time job and still not be able to cover even the most basic costs of just living? It's clear there's a huge gap between the wage on the books and the reality on the ground.
And here's the really crazy part. Think about everything our simulation left out. We didn't budget anything for utilities like electricity or the internet, nothing for clothes, for soap, for basic household supplies. And maybe most importantly, there is zero room for a flat tire, a sick kid, or any of life's little unpredictable emergencies.
The disconnect here becomes really clear when you look at this concept called a living wage. Now, this isn't a political idea. It's a data-driven calculation from researchers at MIT. It represents the actual hourly pay someone needs to earn to meet basic standards of living in their specific city or town.
And when you compare the two, the gap is, well, it's staggering. In Jackson, the living wage is nearly 3 times higher than the minimum wage. And even in Seattle, which has one of the highest minimums in the country, it's still over $13 an hour short of what's actually needed to get by.
And if you zoom out and look at this over a full year, this isn't just a budgeting problem. It's a structural crisis. In both cities, a full-time minimum wage worker ends the year with a deficit of nearly $30,000. This isn't something you can fix by just cutting costs. It's a systemic failure.
And all of this leaves us with a really fundamental question. If the legal minimum wage isn't actually enough to live on, then what does it really mean? It's a tough question that this data forces all of us to think about. Thanks for watching.